Recently, there was a book which was partially funded, I believe, by the UK government, targeting children, trying to suggest that British history is black history. And it doesn't make any sense. It's ridiculous. And the government is basically funding this black revisionist propaganda. I mean, there is a legitimate history in Britain, but this is not it.
It doesn't stretch back very far.
No.
And if you're just going by people in the past had dark skin, we'd just like to clear this up. It does not mean that they are Central, West, East, or Sub-Saharan Africans. In fact, it might just mean that they had a darker complexion to what myself or Josh has right now. Although, given how swarthy you can be, if you're left out in the sun for too long, you might resemble what Cheddar Man actually looked like.
Well, yeah. I mean, I probably have a disproportionate amount of that sort of genealogy, but we'll be getting onto that because, yes, I'm very genetically Celt, so they would have looked like me. Worth bearing in mind. But here's the cover of the book. Here it is. Brilliant Black British History. And, of course, they've got the fist in the air, which obviously a historic symbol, not Black Lives Matter. Although they do have something
BLM
about
is
it.
a historic British movement, don't you know?
Yeah, it's always been British.
It's British Lives Matter. And British back then, everyone just knew meant black.
They're just synonymous with one another.
Of course.
We're actually outliers in our own country. But yes, here you have Stonehenge in the background. You've got some sort of maybe late medieval dress there.
Is there a token white woman in the middle?
There is, yes.
Who's she?
I don't know. Maybe she's a slave owner. I'm presuming that would be the only
Perhaps
reason.
she was a slave.
Yeah, the roles have been reversed now.
Well, I mean, if we're going to assume that all of the important figures of British history were all black, then that must include all of the major slaveholders.
Didn't you know Winston Churchill was secretly a black man? It's true. Not really.
An amazing transformation, I must admit.
But here is something that's quite egregious. This is one of the pages talking about the Romans, and I should probably read a little bit from it. It says, a new civilization rose in Europe from a small city called Rome. I mean, small by what standard of the time? But anyway, pedantry aside, that from that city, sorry.
Embrace pedantry around here.
I know, I am chief pedant. City and empire grew and grew. It conquered parts of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. The Romans wanted to conquer the whole world. Well, it's worth pointing out that they didn't know about the whole world yet, because we didn't know. But this is a children's book. I suppose it's simplifying stuff.
Do people just... it's definitely a purposeful thing, but they just want to associate all of Africa with black. That meaning sub-Saharan Africa, what the 19th century would have referred to as Bantus. They're not. North Africa, historically, is very different from sub-Saharan Africa.
It's worth mentioning as well, in the Roman times, they eventually conquered North Africa after defeating Carthage. And the Carthaginians originally hailed their sort of homeland as Syria, that sort of area of the world. So worth mentioning that. Middle Eastern, maybe.
It turns out when you have a gigantic, inhospitable desert separating two areas of a continent, the people on either side of it tend to be quite different.
It's strange.
I know.
Who'd have thought? But it carries on to say, but the Romans could not travel further south than North Africa. In their way was a desert as wide as an ocean and a warrior queen. Amina Shakato. I don't know whether
that was a
correctly.
Good attempt, actually. That looks about right.
Thank you. That was... I didn't even bother to practice it either. But this lady of Nubia, who would not let them pass. Actually, the real history is that they carried out several expeditions to Africa and realized that it wasn't worth conquering and decided just to trade with some African countries. And after the sort of Caesarian period whereby eventually Augustus defeats Mark Antony and Egypt comes under Roman control, there was a little bit of a confrontation where the Romans seized several of, at the time, they wouldn't have been Nubians, they would have been the Cushites. They seized several of their cities and eventually they sued for peace and they traded for a long time. So that was it. But it wasn't that they held them back. It was, for example, Nero...
So just to confirm, Nigerians and other people like that were not involved in this?
No. But Nero actually sent an expedition because he wanted to conquer this area, and then they came back and said, "There's nothing but desert. Don't bother."
Funny how that happens.
So yeah.
Also, just to confirm, Egypt at this time as well, not black.
No, certainly not.
No, still not really. More Arab these days, but even back then, it wouldn't have been as Arab as it is nowadays. Because
there wouldn't have been any, as in they were their own distinct culture, as well as the fact that Cleopatra was Greek. So yes.
See, I swear I saw a Netflix series telling me the exact opposite of that recently.
Oh yeah, of course. Sorry,
unless
Netflix
Stelios is Stelios black?
I think he might be.
Oh, that explains a lot.
Sorry, Stelios. But anyway, it carries on to say, a Roman historian called Tacitus wrote that the Romans found white people from Europe living on the coast of Britannica, a weird thing to say, while inland lived the original Britons who were dark-skinned and curly-haired.
There's no white man has ever had a slightly darker complexion and curly hair.
I don't have curly hair, but I've got an olive complexion, despite being, I think it's something like 97% Brittonic.
I'm still waiting back on my DNA results, so I'm very excited when I get those.
So it carries on to say, the Roman soldiers were the best in the world, but they shivered in their boots when they faced the warriors who came screaming blue murder out of the lashing British rain. Well, I mean, they eventually conquered us, so not entirely true. But yes, it was scary. I mean, we had the Carnix, which is a weird war horn. We painted ourselves and fought naked. And we had lots of chariots. So yeah, it probably was scary.
Pretty badass.
Mm-hmm. You're going to get me on a little historical tangent here.
Yeah,
but
go for it. I'm always
when
interested.
Caesar took his force to go to the British Isles, the first Roman attempt at coming here, they saw loads of warriors on the cliffs of Dover just lining it. And apparently it scared the men quite terribly.
That would be quite intimidating.
You've not even landed and there are just scores and scores of men because, of course, it being the sort of Celtic world and the channel separating the continent, they'd heard about the Romans and were expecting them.
I forget who it was, but I believe before Caesar arrived here, I think there was another traveller, possibly from Rome, who arrived in the mid 3rd century BC, who described us quite differently to how Caesar described us. Obviously, Caesar said we're...
about Pythias the Greek.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, Greek. And he said that we were actually very nice people, very gentle, and loved to share and live in nice communities. And then Caesar comes and he's like, the barbarians, brutes! I murdered a lot of them, but that don't pay any attention.
Mm-hmm. But obviously, this isn't an accurate representation of history. And let's have a look at some of the other pages. Here we are. This is Conquerors and Migrants chapter. And is
this the average Dark Ages? Did they misinterpret what dark meant?
I think they might have done. Because, I don't really remember this part. They're talking about Vikings. I think they've got Anglo-Saxon stuff.
No, I think that guy in the tunic there, the black man, I think that's King Offa.
Which one do you mean?
That gentleman there. Yeah, him. That's King Offa.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, my Mercian blood is calling out and recognizes him.
Boo, Anglo-Saxons. And here we have the Stuarts. This is an accurate representation. This is what British history looks like.
I'm sorry, that's just so ridiculous. Just to put the Stuarts here. Which one's James the First?
I don't know. Everything I know about history has just been thrown out of the water here. I mean, clearly we've been lied to, Harry. This is our true history. But you get the gist. But the Telegraph did an article about this.
And you say that this was partially funded by the government?
Yes, it was. I'll be getting onto that.
Oh, all right, okay.
But the Telegraph breaks down some of the details of this because I haven't read the full book because I don't want to buy it and give them money. But I've seen enough.
Pretty racist.
It's more that it's bad history and I care about history.
You don't want to give black people gibs? What are you, racist or something?
It wouldn't be gibs. It would be a monetary exchange for goods and services, Harry, which is perfectly reasonable.
Could you describe this as either a service or a good?
It's a good laugh. But anyway, what the Telegraph says, if I can get my notes up. So it says, Stonehenge was built by Black Britons. A new children's book has claimed. I haven't been able to find that page online. unfortunately. But
I've seen it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's just a load of black guys standing around Stonehenge.
Okay. The illustrated book entitled Brilliant Black British History by the Nigerian British author, who'd have thought, Atinuke, says...
Nigerian-born British author. So Nigerian with a passport.
Yes.
Oh, okay, nice.
Says every single British person comes from a migrant. Well, I mean, every single person ever to have existed probably migrated somewhere, because hunter-gatherers weren't sedentary. It was only until the dawn of farming that sort of societies stayed where they were.
This is like a single-digit IQ take, and it's becoming more and more frequent, and it's such gaslighting, is that if you go back 4,000 years, you probably came from an Eastern hunter-gatherer mixing with a Western hunter-gatherer, so technically you're a migrant. Okay, but...
I think that's the Scandinavians, the combination between East and West.
Well, whatever. They'll say something like that, and you'll go, okay, so what does that mean? Why does that matter?
They won't be using the actual
they won't
paleo-anthropological terms like that, though.
They won't know, will they?
But yes, the book, published by Bloomsbury, which is quite a famous, large publisher, and promoted by the Arts Council-funded literacy charity, the Book Trust. The Arts Council is part of the Digital Media, Culture and Sport department of the government, by the way. So yes, they funded it via a charity. States that Britain was a black country for more than 7,000 years before white people came during that time, and that the most famous British monument was built, Stonehenge. So yes, black people built Stonehenge. The introduction says Britain has been a mostly white country for a lot less time than it has been mostly a black country. Atanuke's book for readers aged 7+, because I would imagine it'd be 7 and under, wouldn't it? Because by the age of 7, you would start getting some credulity about you, just like, hang on a minute, how did this happen? Was there... It's like...
Right, if this is the story that they're trying to promote, the story that they're trying to tell, which is that, it was inhabited by people of dark skin, which they want to associate all with Africans, despite the fact that sub-Saharan Africans are a very distinct genetic mix compared to most other populations across the world.
Well, yes, for example, they don't have any Neanderthal DNA like Europeans and Middle Easterners. They don't have Denisovans like the Asians.
In fact, I believe that I've seen some figures saying that 19% of their ancestry comes from some different...
Homo erectus, which is actually one of our ancestors that we are directly descended from, and it coexisted.
And you don't get that in Asian, European, Native American population.
But yeah, in Africa, there were lots of... there's a wider variety of various hominins that were, ancestors or cousins of ours. There's actually funnily enough, greater diversity, but in the actual sense.
And also, European people are the only ones, I believe, I know this through watching Survive the Jive, to have any remnant of haplogroups R1b, found within the Western hunter-gatherers, I believe it is.
Yes,
we're the only population in the world to have that haplogroup in us. Africans don't have that. And if it just meant that back in the day, Western hunter-gatherers, while probably not as dark as Cheddar Man, did have darker skin than us, that doesn't mean that they were sub-Saharan African. That meant that they were our ancestors, and over time, through mixing with other groups, our skin pigmentation became lighter, presumably to adapt to low sun conditions. I mean,
but the adaptation doesn't have to be like your sub-Saharan African to like Icelandic.
No. That would be quite a remarkable change to see.
Yeah, it probably would have been a lot smaller than that.
Yeah, so this, and especially given that we know who Cheddar Man's ancient descendant is.
It's also mentioning Survive the Jive. It's worth mentioning that he raised a very good point in his video about Cheddar Man, saying that if you had a high amount of melanation in your skin in Britain, you'd basically have to live by the coast because you would be vitamin D deficient. You can only really get that from other animals, so you would need to eat lots of shellfish as a hunter-gatherer. But if you find Cheddar Man, he's in Somerset in Cheddar Gorge, which isn't necessarily right next to the coast. Obviously, Somerset is close to the coast, but he wasn't there. And he was quite far away.
Another interesting point that Tom brought up was that one of the people advising the research team was a man called Tom Booth on the Cheddar Man Project. And I believe that he in the past has said that genetic researchers have to be very careful when presenting the results of their genetic testing, just in case they fan the flames of white supremacists.
I've heard about this fellow, and I find him rather unsavory, is the way I'd put it. But anyway, it carries on to say, it takes the reader through a chronological overview of black people's presence in Britain, saying the Cheddar Man, the oldest human remains found in Britain, but not anymore, which I'll get onto in a second, had skin as dark as can be, which is just a lie. But it's worth mentioning that the oldest fossil here, earliest fossil in the UK, revealed how ancient European hominins were connected. This is from about 480,000 years ago.
That's a while longer than 9,000
This
years.
is a Homo heidelbergensis, which I don't know whether
Gesundheit.
Is a huh? I didn't hear what you said.
I said Gesundheit. Bless you.
Oh, right. But yes, it comes from, the name comes from the Heidelberg area of Germany, because that's where the first fossil came from. But if you want to class this as a human being, it's part of the Homo family, but it isn't an anatomically modern human. So, things have been found earlier. And speaking of which, here we are. This as of January 2023.
Wait. So we found something that's of the Homo family.
Yes.
From almost 500,000 years ago.
Nearly 500,000 years ago.
Yes, in Britain. When is it that they say the migrations out of Africa happened for the linchpin of the out of Africa theory? Wasn't it something like only 100,000 years ago?
Oh, yeah. The out of Africa theory is a load of rubbish, because hominins had existed in Europe and Asia for a considerable amount of time.
I believe we were also
millions of years, actually.
I believe we're also starting to find ancient remains of apes in Europe and in parts of mainland Asia as well.
Mm-hmm.
Central Asia.
Yeah. We have.
Yeah.
So here is some recent research. This is one from 11,000 years ago. This is from the start of this year, so maybe this book was published a bit earlier, but the Telegraph should have probably picked up on this. But yes, this is the new oldest thing. It was found up north. Not enough information about it yet, but basically, Cheddar Man's no longer the oldest, and I just wanted to clear that up because
nice.
I wanted, and also it's great that we found some new stuff as well. I mean, I'm always happy to see the work of archaeology going on. But it's worth mentioning as well that if you want to learn more about our early ancestors, here we have my video, Contemplations, talking about the sort of early origins of humanity, talking about our ancestors and things like that. So here it is. Check it out. It's very good. It's one of the things I'm most proud of that I've done.
I've been watching a bit of that recently, and it is excellent. So
thank you very much.
Definitely check it out.
Mm-hmm. But let's talk a bit more about Cheddar Man, shall we? Because let's scroll down just so we see the representation in lots of meanings of the word. It's worth mentioning, had blue eyes. That doesn't really happen in Africa very much. He's also part of a group.
Happen that much in any non-European.
No. But he was part of a group referred to by paleontologists as Western hunter-gatherers or Cro-Magnon man. And this group of people existed all throughout Europe, basically. They were the ascendant group for a short while.
I've been told that I resemble Cro-Magnon. I've been told I've got Cro-Magnon brow.
You've got archaic human physiognomy. You are correct.
Thank you. Somewhat Neanderthal-esque.
Mm-hmm. But it's worth mentioning that 90% of the DNA of the British Isles was replaced in the late Neolithic, around 6,400 to 3,500 BC, by what we refer to as the Bell Beaker people that are largely the descendants of most modern Britons today. And they got here via the Netherlands, and they themselves were descended a part of an Indo-European steppe people. And this is the people that also called Celtic peoples are descended from. And
so would these be the early European farmers that Tom's referring to in this tweet?
It's also worth mentioning as well that this origin, this sort of genetic analysis and archaeological analysis is supported by the history of the English language. We've got Indo-European roots in the English language, and so there are commonalities between English and other languages. But I break that down in a recent Contemplations, in which part 2 will be out by the time this video is out. So where was I? Ah, yes, the the Telegraph carries on saying, the leader of 2018 research into Cheddarman's DNA said it was impossible to know with certainty how this early inhabitant looked, and other researchers noted problems with attempting to predict skin tone from the genetic model used. Recent genetic analysis has shown that inhabitants of Britain in the period when Stonehenge was completed around 2500 BC were pale-skinned early farmers whose ancestors had spread from Anatolia. Correct, yes. And just to support this view, this is Tom Rousel, who is Survived the Jive, does some great work on YouTube. Stonehenge was built by people genetically the same as modern-day Sardinians, except they had lived in northwest Europe over 2,000 years, so they were lighter. There was nothing black about them. These are two reconstructed Neolithic men from the British Isles. All the skeletons from Britain dated between 4000 BC and 2500 BC belonged to this race, known as early European farmers. None of them were African. Bloomsbury Publishing should be taken to court for publishing outright lies in the book Brilliant Black History, which they claim these people were black at no point in the history of this island has it been mostly black, i.e. populated by sub-Saharan African people. They are utterly discredited by publishing such nonsense, which is very true. And although we have no formal affiliation, I would like to mention he's got a book about Europe, a video about Europe's first megaliths, if you wanted to check that out. I think it's a good video. That's just a general recommendation. But yeah, he deserves the credit for his hard work in discrediting this nonsense. So it's also worth mentioning that we have an interview, I believe, which Bo did, which is going to go up yesterday. But at the time of recording, it is not yet up. But that will be on the website if you want to check it out. That is, of course, with Tom from Survive the Jive, if you appreciated what he said about this sort of stuff.
I'm still annoyed I missed all of these excellent guests coming in.
I know, I missed this as well. But, if we go back to the article again, let's carry on and have a look at some of the claims that have been said so far. The book states that Roman historian Tacitus, we've mentioned that. It adds that by the Middle Ages, Britain was a hodgepodge of people, original British migrants, Celts, Romans, Britons, Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, Africans, and Normans. One of those is not like the others.
Yeah. Sneak that in there, why don't you?
Mm-hmm. They spoke a hodgepodge of languages too. Well, not really. Also, what era, when? When it was, the Celts, they probably had idiosyncrasies of their own tribes. But a lot of the time, like the Anglo-Saxons, all had a mutually intelligible language. They could even communicate to a certain extent with the Vikings because the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings were geographical neighbours from the sort of point of origin before migrating to Britain. So,
and also just talking about the Middle Ages like it was a span of maybe 10 to 15 years. No, it was hundreds and hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just smash all of that together. And if you're saying Africans, the only example that I could think of would be, what was his name? Tom Booth, the trumpet player in King Henry VIII's course.
Mm-hmm.
They caught, one guy. Congrats. Mission accomplished, boys. We found one actually African guy as an example. All the rest of them we made up, but we got the one in.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It's just really strange that they're trying to crowbar into history.
It's not strange at all when they, if they talk about Great Replacement as being some kind of grand conspiracy theory.
Fair point. But it carries on to say, in the period of the Tudors and Stuarts, an incoming black Muslim population, that didn't happen, brought new knowledge about textiles, medicine, maths, and navigation. We did inherit some of that knowledge, but I don't think it was
black Muslim population during the Tudors and Stuarts.
We just have always had migrants, proto-boat people, that's what they call them.
Just because he was a single Moorish black man,
mm-hmm.
so Muslim black man, does not mean that Tom Booth represented some grand, wider community of black Muslims in England at the time. No, that's absolute rubbish.
It goes on to say, the book says that following the Second World War, Britain needed help, and so the government asked people from the colonies to come. These included the Windrush generation and others from countries that had been left poor after slavery and colonization. That's a misconception. If you're a hunter-gatherer, how can you be left poorer by being introduced to modern technology? Well, modern at the time. Doesn't make sense. It also includes a page on Black Lives Matter, which states that although race does not scientifically exist, black people suffer institutional racism. I kind of agree that it's ethnicity, not race, and that the notion of race doesn't really make sense.
Even then, you can take various different ethnicities and group them into genetic clusters that do match up with self-reportings of people's race if you want to be low resolution with just white, black, Asian, etc. So that there are genetic clusters that match up that are closer to one another than they are with other people on separate races. There are blurry boundaries between some of them, especially if you're talking about southern Spain and some of the Mediterranean where there's been intermixing with North Africans over the years. But there is a basis for it scientifically.
It kind of depends on how you categorize stuff. Like, for example, like some Indian people who are very, very dark could be mistaken for Africans, even though they're genetically distinct. And so,
if you're going just by low resolution skin
that's
color,
what I mean. Yeah,
if you're just going by skin color, but if you're talking about the specific genetics, then
I know all about that.
Then I think you and I would agree.
Of course, yeah. So it carries on to quote some historians, which I found funny because they said it in much the same terms that we did. So, Atanuke's book has caused concern among historians, with Dr. Zarir Masani saying seems typical of the kind of wokedom that's been colonizing our schools and universities.
I feel like they very specifically chose a man with that name, just to really hammer home the point. See, even this man doesn't agree with this rubbish.
He claims it was evidence of brainwashing children with outright lies, confusion, and misinformation, which is very true. David Abulathia, a historian and Cambridge emeritus professor, said the Nazis claimed that the cultural achievements of the North were the work of blonde, fair-skinned folk. Making skin color a criterion for judging the great achievements like Stonehenge is therefore not a new idea. It's also rubbish. It only gets interesting if their skins were blue or green.
Depends how cold it was out, surely.
I mean, if they were blue, I imagine they wouldn't be doing much building because they're about to die.
Yeah.
But the final thing I wanted to mention is this ridiculousness, and I think we'll need to give this a listen because this is some clear scholars. I mean, look at that wizard. He knows what's up, doesn't he?
I think we've got some doctors and nurses on screen right here.
But this is definitely one to listen to because it's hilarious.
I love Black Hebrew Israelite anthropology. It's so amazing.
So if we go back to the start, let's listen to them claim.
So now, just remember, Bron was named after their complexion, and now they named the city Brunningerfield. Why? Because there's tons of brown people in that city, man. There's tons of brown people in that city that look like this before they tried to whitewash it. So just remember, this man was ruling over that city. Go ahead.
Brunningfield occurs in a charter of Ethos.
Wait. It occurs in what?
In a charter.
So it says Brunningerfield occurs in a charter. Now, this right here, put the picture on him. This is Epheston right here. It occurred in his charter. And Bron means brown man, which means his people was dark-skinned people. That's who they was, man. The Anglo-Saxons was black.
That's right.
Go ahead.
In a charter of Ethelston.
Anyway, if you want to find that, boy, you come on down to the UK.
That's right.
Go on there,
I can't bring myself to dislike these guys. I kind of love them.
Ethelstan was a black man.
We was Anglo-Saxon.
I don't know why I'm doing an American accent. It was more London. But you get the idea. And then, again, we have Survive the Jive, bringing facts and logic to the scenario. The silly people in that video believe that the manuscript images of Anglo-Saxons like this one depict black people. The metal-based pigments used in illuminated manuscripts for silver, white, yellow, or red, lead oxidize and turn to a silver black color. You can see on the hands what the original color was like. To claim these people were Africans is insane. Yes, obviously. I mean, the Anglo-Saxons, northern Germany and southern Denmark, famous African. I mean, maybe
15,
today.
20 years ago, Louis Theroux was making BBC documentaries about how silly this kind of Black Hebrew Israelite anthropology was. There's that fantastic scene where he meets with the leader of the New York branch. And he's just going, Shakespeare, black man. Henry VIII, black man. And you're just supposed to sit there and laugh at how ridiculous it is. Could he make that nowadays? Would he disagree nowadays? Louis Theroux these days, would he be sitting there going, tell me more, oh wise one? I mean, it's so ridiculous.
Edward Colston, black man.
That's right. When those students tore down that statue, they were tearing down black British history.
That's right. Everyone in British history was actually black. This is
including me.
factually correct. In fact, I'm secretly black. Yes, that is
Power of editing has been fooling you all this whole time.
that is true.
Gonna N-word pass for you. N-word pass for you.
Thank you very much.
There
And
you
on that note, yes, the British government is unintentionally or intentionally, depending on who
Completely
you ask.
intentionally.
Yeah, it seems to be intentional, brainwashing children into believing that there's a lot of black history that there is not.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the premium articles, this one on What is a Fascist, with an audio track for silver and gold tiers. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.